As happy and cheerful as Tevite might appear to us, the players, the world itself isn't without its problems. Poverty, crimes, and death are rather common regardless of the region. It is this side of Tevat that many of the main characters fight or struggle against. Most of the characters each have their own tragedies, and in Inazuma, this is what inadvertently created its best detective. While most others dealt with these problems by some measure of force, like any anime protagonist, did you know that we have a Batman-esque character in Genshin Impact? Before we get into that, if you want to see more Genshin Impact content, do consider subscribing to the channel. If for whatever reason you are unfamiliar with Batman, let me give you a crash course. Just bear with me as his story has a lot of parallels with the character I'll be talking about in this video. Despite being a hero, Batman is a character that is driven by two relatively negative emotions: fear and guilt. He feels guilty for the death of his parents and how he was powerless to do much of anything when they got mugged, while all he experienced was fear. In turn, he uses fear as a tool to discourage others from crime, and his need to prevent crime again comes from his guilt. This is really what drives Batman, but enough about him. The character I'm going to talk about in this video is Heizou. We're going to start the story a little bit in the middle, and when Heizou first reached Inazuma, he partnered with Sango to open a detective firm. Due to his past, which we'll get into a bit later, Heizou has this overwhelming need to stop or prevent crime outright. In the beginning though, he assumed being a private detective would accomplish this. After spending some time doing rather mundane cases, he felt that his time wasn't properly utilized. This is when he decided to leave and join the Tenryo Commission. Under the commission, he pursued minor cases at first, and eventually, when he was done, he took it upon himself to solve the cold cases. At first, most others just laughed at his effort, as these unsolved cases remain that way for a reason: they're unsolvable. Slowly but surely, however, Heizou solved them one by one. He would pick up on the simplest of clues, and using his intuition and the ability to connect patterns, he found the culprits of otherwise unsolvable cases. Eventually, he would go through every case and solve them all, and throughout the whole ordeal, his reputation kept growing. Once he reached the peak of his career, he was consulted on just about any crime that seemed unsolvable. But despite reaching the height of his ambition, he still felt it wasn't enough. To understand why he felt unfulfilled, we need to now delve into his past. You see, there is a reason why Heizou is adamant in trying to prevent crime before it even happens. In his view, solving a crime or finding the bad guy, as it were, occurs only after the crime has been committed. It doesn't do anything to alleviate the pain and suffering of those who are victims of the crime. While he can catch a murderer, he cannot bring the person who has died back to life. And while he tries to use the reputation and fear of his name to discourage the bad guys from even doing crime at all, his motivations, much like Batman, is largely rooted in guilt, whether he realizes this or not. A long time ago, when he was still young, he met this rather odd person at a festival. They became rather good friends, and this friend of his would often bring back some new trinket or book to share with Heizou. Heizou assumed he was the son of some traveling merchant and thus had access to all these random things, so he didn't think much of it. It was much later that Heizou found out that his friend was actually just a common thief. He immediately ended the friendship, not wanting to have anything to do with this person, and threw out all the gifts he had received from him, save for a pebble they had both found at a nearby river. The pebble was one of two identical rocks which they had split, and because it wasn't tainted by theft, he still felt like he could keep it. A full year later though, at the very same festival, Heizou was walking around and saw a crowd gather. To his surprise, it was his old friend who was lying on the ground covered in blood. What had happened was a thief had tried to steal his friend's Mora pouch, but because his friend put up a fight, he got stabbed instead. The thief ran off, and Heizou could only hold his friend as he lay dying. Completely confused as to why this former friend of his would choose money over his own life, Heizou angrily reached for his pouch, fully preparing to berate him. But all he found in his pouch was the stone they had split a year ago. Before much else could be said, his friend died. Now, in his lore, it's specifically mentioned that Heizou took this higher calling of being a detective because he felt it was his purpose to stop crimes like this from happening. His goal was seemingly to prevent such tragedies. But I can't help but wonder whether this is all there is to it. It's likely Heizou felt a tremendous amount of guilt for essentially abandoning and judging his former friend only to have him die right in his arms. He might feel that he lost all this time with his friend when he could have just made up with him. So while he says that he does this all in the name of some higher form of justice, I think all he's trying to do is prevent others from feeling what he felt. The loss of a friend, and at worst, losing one before he could make up for the lost time. His guilt and the pain of his loss is likely the true reason he zealously pursues criminals and even wants to prevent the crime from happening outright, all to spare others from the suffering he had felt a long time ago. Now, I know this isn't the typical sort of theory video I would make, but while I was trying to find something in Heizou's story, I just felt that his tragic backstory was interesting enough to share. Shortly after this is when he got his vision, no doubt born out of an intense desire to rid the world of crime, or as he saw it, sin. It's unlikely he ever achieves this though, and will continue being driven by guilt. But that does it for this video. If you enjoyed it, do consider subscribing to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. As usual, have a nice day.